Hello everyone, welcome to the Level Kino channel. Today we are going to do a complete ranking of all the X-Men movies. Yes, including those that I wish didn't exist. And also those that are among the best comic book movies ever made. This is my personal opinion, it may not correspond to the general consensus, but that's okay. Different perspectives can reveal interesting things that we hadn't thought of before. The video will contain spoilers. Without further ado, let's get started. 12. Dark Phoenix. It probably comes as no surprise that Dark Phoenix is in the last place. This is the movie that killed the X-Men on the big screen, and even now, almost 6 years later, their future is uncertain. Where to even begin with the problems of this movie? There are so many that it almost deserves its own video. The first signs that the X-Men movies were in decline were already visible in the previous movie, Apocalypse, and in this movie they are even worse. At the height of activist Hollywood, we have incredible bad dialogue.
I can't actually remember the last time you were the one risking something. And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
And the assassination of Charles Xavier's character, who goes from being a wise mentor in previous films to an egotistical fool just so that other, mostly female characters can pick on him. The Mystique costume or CGI looks the worst of all the films, even the first one, which was already 19 years old when this movie was released. Sophie Turner, who tried to make it big on the big screen after the success of Game of Thrones, proved that she can play anything other than the scared girl that she was in the series. On the contrary, Michael Fassbender's acting talent is completely wasted on a nonsensical script that, instead of sticking to the very well written comic book source material, takes only the basic themes from it and turns the film into something that should never have been made, as evidenced by how many times the script was rewritten and how long it took to release the film due to legitimate quality concerts on the part of the studio. The only good thing about this film is the action scene on the train, which the screenwriters couldn't ruin with their dialogue. If you want to watch the film, don't. Just watch this train scene on YouTube and be glad that you saved yourself about 2 hours of your time. 11. The New Mutants. This film is only below Dark Phoenix on my list because I went into it with zero expectations, and thank goodness for that. What is a fresh take on the X-Men series in the comics, with new themes such as fantasy, more sci-fi, coming of age, and mysticism, is a nonsensical mishmash of a few characters who never get enough screen time to make you care about them, and what little screen time they do get to shine is wasted due to yet another bad script with dialogue that rivals Dark Phoenix for the worst. The film manages to turn Magik, one of the most popular mutants, supported by rising star Anna Taylor-Joy, into probably the least likable character in all the X-Men films, and we had some very strong candidates for that position in Dark Phoenix. The whole story barely makes sense. A group of mutants is locked up in what appears to be a mental institution, but viewers with above average intelligence will immediately realize that something else is going on. Unfortunately, the secret is gradually revealed in an incredibly boring and hard to believe way, which is peppered with unsuccessful elements such as the first lesbian love between girl number 1, who can't act, and girl number 2, who, after seeing her typical English rose face, you immediately understand why British men had to become such good sailors and look for women elsewhere. Cherry on the top of this cake is the CGI, which you would expect to see in a 2005 TV series rather than a movie that was supposed to be a showcase for one of the most popular X-Men comic book spin-offs. Number 10. Deadpool and Wolverine. This choice will probably be controversial for this reason. How come this movie is so low on the list? Is it really only slightly better than The Mutants, Dark Phoenix, and worse than, say, Wolverine Origins? I think so, because I absolutely hate Deadpool. This hero is just not for me. I found his character incredibly cringeworthy. I don't find him funny. I laughed about it twice during the whole movie, and breaking the fourth wall really isn't as clever as the writers probably think it is. So, given that one of the two main characters made me want to tear my ears off during the movie, I simply can't rate it any higher. At the same time, Wolverine's return is a success. He's the good old Wolverine with many scars from the past that even his superpowers can heal, whom we know so well. He fills his character development perfectly. And, from a good for nothing, he once again becomes the hero he was in Logan. All the scenes with Deadpool are really disappointing and drag the film down a lot. If someone had made a cut without him and left only the scenes with Wolverine and the other characters, I would have rated this work much better. Number 9. X-Men Origins, Wolverine. A famous case of spoiling something that should have been gold. This film was released after the X-Men trilogy, which was very warmly received and positively reviewed, with Wolverine as the audience favorite. The standalone film was supposed to be a big hit. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. The film simply lacks the chemistry that would somehow tie everything together and make it more than just a collection of scenes that may look cool at first glance, but lack any depth. There are even a few scenes that leave the viewer scratching their head, wondering what the hell the creators were thinking when they shot them. I'm mainly talking about the final battle between Wolverine and Deadpool, who isn't Deadpool at all, but some kind of Frankenstein monster that bears no resemblance to his comic book counterpart. This Deadpool doesn't talk though, so at least he can be as cringeworthy as in his solo films and the film with Wolverine, but he makes up for it by looking stupid. It was a big disappointment, but it didn't deter the studio from further attempts at a solo Wolverine movie, and so just a few years later, we got a remedy called The Wolverine, which I'll review in a moment. Number 8. X-Men Apocalypse. In my opinion, this film isn't as bad as its rating might suggest. Sure, it's a bit of a drop in quality from the previous films in the series and hits at the horrors that come after it, but it's watchable on its own. Its biggest problem is that Apocalypse, the main villain of this film, was much more developed in the comics, which is simply not possible to do in a 2-hour film, so it doesn't reach the quality of previous villains such as Magneto, who appears in this film for the first time as a secondary villain, but redeems himself at the end, fulfilling his development, which is very interesting to watch. As with Apocalypse, the other villains don't get much screen time, so Psylocke, one of the most popular comic book characters, is also almost absent from the film, except for a few action scenes. Simply not enough time in the film. This was supposed to be more like Avengers Endgame, where, after a series of films introducing us to all the important characters, everything culminates in one action-packed film. Unfortunately, the creators took a shortcut, and what remains is a work that is undercooked, bland, and unsatisfying. Number 7. The Wolverine. Unlike his first solo adventure, Wolverine's trip to Japan was a success. It's a fairly standard Wolverine story, where he starts out depressed, but gradually has to overcome his feelings of inferiority and help those who really need it. And in the process, learn how to let people get close to him again. I enjoyed the film until the last third, when the previous grounded action scenes turned into strange travesties that should have remained on the pages of the comic book and not been recreated one-to-one on the big screen. The scene with motorcycles riding on the rooftops fighting Wolverine is quite strange and spoiled my impression of the film a little, but that doesn't mean it spoiled the first 2/3 of the film, which were very good. Number 6. X-Men The Last Stand. The last installment of the original X-Men trilogy is the worst, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. While the previous 2 installments contained interesting internal conflicts between the heroes, in this film almost everything is external, and that's the downside. There aren't as many psychological dilemmas for the mutants to deal with, but rather a final confrontation between good and evil. The drama is thus replaced by action, and this film becomes a typical action blockbuster, of which there are many on the market. What is interesting about the film is the culmination of Wolverine's development, who, after 2 films full of hesitation, finally accepts his role in the X-Men and becomes one of its leaders, which is topped off by having to kill Jean Grey, which is incredibly difficult for him. Unfortunately, that's where the film's interesting points end, and otherwise it's good old-fashioned battle that neither offends nor excites. Number 5. X-Men. The very first X-Men movie, a film that helped kick off the Marvel era in the 21st century, is one of their first comic book movies. The film shows its age. The story is simple, Hugh Jackman is not yet on steroids, and the whole thing is really just a tentative exploration of what comic book movies can be and what will they become. The creators are a little ashamed of the film's comic book roots, and instead of the iconic yellow suits, the team wears black leather costumes, which is humorously noted 24 years later in the X-Men 97 series.
Am I going to war or a circus?
What'd you expect? Black leather?
But it was clearly worth it, because the film was a success, changed the public's opinion of comic book characters, and opened the door not only for the X-Men trilogy, but also for other films based on graphic novels. Despite the simplicity of the story, the action is great. Wolverine vs. Mystique is a great sequence, and speaking of Mystique, she was her best in the trilogy, which is saying something when this film is from 2000 and the last one with her is from 2019. She also has a seductiveness that Jennifer Lawrence has not been able to replicate, and if the rumors about her return to the new Avengers films are true, we have something to look forward to. Overall, this is a great introduction to the world of the X-Men, which brought us the best part of the trilogy, namely, Number 4. X-Men 2. Right from the start, it's clear that this movie is going to be a blast. The opening scene with Nightcrawler infiltrating the White House is probably the best scene in all of the X-Men movies. In addition to great action, this film offers something that I felt was missing in the 3rd installment, namely the psychological dilemmas of the heroes, which are brilliantly written and which I always enjoy seeing in every film. Wolverine struggles with his unclear past, Pyro with whether to join the X-Men or Magneto, and Jean, at the end, with the fact that she must sacrifice herself so that her friends can survive. This film does everything the first one did, but it's bigger and better. More characters, greater character depth, better action scenes. The film falters a bit in the middle, when its pace is slowest, but it picks up speed again towards the end of the film with a great finale. Wolverine's fight with Deathstrike, and a tease of Jean Grey as Phoenix, whom we will see in the third film. Number 3. X-Men First Class. It's difficult to evaluate this film compared to the second installment, Days of the Future Past, because they are very close in quality. I would say that we could swap them around on this list and nothing would happen. Both are great films that are at the very top of what comic book adaptations have to offer. Unlike some films, they stay true to their source material and show that there is no need to invent anything new when you can just take something that's already great and tweak it slightly for the big screen. We get a slightly different view of Charles Xavier here, seen him as a young, inexperienced mutant who will grow into the leader we know so well. Young Magneto is unrestrained, which contrasts with the calculating, devious version of him we see in the later films. The scenes with Magneto are some of the best in the film. His pure rage and desire for revenge, which Xavier tries to keep in check, are the backbone of the entire film, making its ending all the more painful when Magneto chooses the path of evil and accidentally cripples his own best friend. All of this is complemented by New Mutants, who don't get much screen time and rely more on their more popular counterparts such as Mystique and Beast. The film is set in the 1960s, which adds to its charm, and the Cold War setting in which the creators place the mutants is really interesting and elevates the film to the third place in my ranking. Number 2. X-Men Days of the Future Past. As I said, this movie and First Class are almost equally good, but what probably puts it above the other is the scene with Quicksilver freeing Magneto. This scene is great and probably the second best of all the X-Men movies after Nightcrawler's attempt to kill the President in X-Men 2. In addition to its quality, this movie shares other similarities with First Class. It takes place in the past, for the most part, although this doesn't play as big of a role here as in the previous film. And then we have another battle between Xavier and Magneto, in which Charles tries to show Magneto his good side and convince him that he doesn't have to be a villain and that it's worth giving humanity a chance. This film contains perhaps the most sci-fi elements of all, switching between the future and the past, and how they interact with each other is not that profound, but it works as an interesting storytelling tool. And I mustn't forget the return of Wolverine, who only made a small cameo appearance in First Class, but here he returns in full force and drives the film forward with a great performance by Hugh Jackman, who forms an incredibly strong main trio with Xavier, James McAvoy, and Magneto, Michael Fassbender. Number 1. Logan. Unsurprisingly, at the top of my list, and probably that of many other X-Men reviewers, is Logan. It's not a controversial choice, but that's simply because it's hard to argue that any other film is better than this one. It's the perfect farewell to Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, which was later re-evaluated in Deadpool and Wolverine, and the perfect passing of the torch to a new generation in the form of his clone and successor. X-23, the director perfectly understands Wolverine's character, who, as usual, struggles with his unresolved past, this time worsened by the fact that he is older and not only he is dying, but also his best friend Xavier is dying too. The whole thing is brought to perfection by the fact that his redemption at the end of the film is final, and Wolverine finally leaves behind all the suffering that tormented him during his life and dies knowing that he has secured a place and passed on everything he has learned to his genetical daughter X-23, who, despite her complicated personality, takes in all his lessons and buries him knowing that he has laid the perfect foundation for her to stand on and live her own life. Okay, so here you have it, a complete list of all X-Men movies, from best to worst. You might say that I should have included Deadpool 1 and 2, because they also belong to the X-Men universe, but I don't really agree, because they have their own specific style that differs from the other X-Men movies in that they don't take themselves seriously at all and constantly break the fourth wall. Plus, as I said in my review of Deadpool and Wolverine, I can't stand his character, so I didn't want to ruin my day by watching his standalone movies, which would most likely end up at the very bottom of my list. Let me know in the comments below if you would change anything, what you agreed on and disagreed with, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.